The dim red emergency lights of the orbital station flickered like dying embers as Captain Elena Reyes floated through the shattered command deck, her mag boots clanging against twisted metal where the bulkheads had buckled under the Voran Fleet's opening barrage. Blood drifted in perfect spheres around her, some hers, most belonging to the crew that had trusted her to keep them alive when the Galactic Concordance finally came calling. Outside the cracked viewport, the blue marble of Earth burned impetuous continents outlined in fire where the Voran plasma lances had kissed the atmosphere. Elena's gloved hand tightened around the grip of her sidearm, knuckles white even through the suit fabric. Because the message still echoed in her helmet comes, spoken in that calm, superior tone the Voran imperator reserved for lesser species. Humanity has been weighed and found wanting. Surrender your fleets, dismantle your defenses, and accept protected status under Concordance law. Mercy is offered. Mercy. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She had replied exactly what every human commander, still breathing, had replied. Come and take it. They had laughed. Of course they had, those towering, obsidian-scaled warriors who had conquered 300 worlds without ever meeting a species stubborn enough to spit in their face. The Voran didn't he understand that humans had spent 10,000 years proving we dan. Tebow when someone offers us chains, gift-wrapped as kindness. Elena pushed off a console and drifted toward the central holotable where the last transmission still hovered. Frozen on the Imperator's angular features, golden eyes gleaming with the confidence of a predator who had never once been the prey. Behind him stood the Concordance delegates, sleek crystalline beings from the Thaler collective gaseous swirls of the Aethery, and the ever-smiling synthetic envoys of the core minds, those ancient Ayas who claimed to have shepherded civilization since before stars were born. All of them nodding along as the Voran spoke for the galaxy, all of them certain that humanity's brief, noisy emergence onto the stellar stage was about to end in quiet assimilation. Elena reached out and swiped the image away, replacing it with tactical overlays that painted a grim picture. 80% of the Sol defense. Fleet gone in the first 6 hours, Mars shipyards, slagged Luna base, silent, and the Voran armada already sliding into high orbit like wolves circling a wounded herd. Yet, something in the data caught her eye. Narrow window. 43 minutes until their next bombardment cycle, when their shields recalibrated and their dreadnoughts hung momentarily vulnerable. 43 minutes to do something no rational species would even consider. She keyed her command channel, voice raw but steady. All remaining captains, this is Reyes. Rendezvous at Lagrange Point 5. We're not running. We're not surrendering. We're going to remind them why every species that ever tried to protect us ended up learning the hard way, that humans don't do leashes. Static answered first, then fragmented voices, some broken, some furious, all human checking in from the handful of frigates, corvettes, and half-crippled cruisers that had survived the opening salvo by sheer spite and luck. Among them was Lieutenant Commander Jocks, Harlan Kelson Preacher. Flying the battered heavy cruiser, defiant, out of the Jupiter yards, a man who quoted ancient texts and modern rock lyrics with equal reverence and who had once told Elena that humanity's greatest strength was our refusal to accept that any story had to end the way our enemies wrote it. There was also Dr. Amrita Singh, civilian xenobiologist turned reluctant war strategist aboard the science vessel. Curiosity, whose mind worked 3 moves ahead of everyone else and who had spent the last year decoding Vorancom protocols just to prove they weren't as infallible as they pretended, and somewhere farther out, slipping through the asteroid belt like ghosts, the Black Ops frigate Wraith under Captain Marcus Ghost Delgado, a man the Concordance didn't even know existed because his entire career had been spent making sure humanity kept a few cards hidden from galactic oversight. Elena felt the familiar burn behind her eyes, not tears. Never tears in front of the crew, but the white-hot rage that had carried her people through every dark century of their history. She thought of her daughter's safe for, so she prayed deep in the underground shelters beneath. Denver thought of the cities already burning, thought of every child who would never see a night sky without the shadow of alien warships if they lost this fight. The Voran had broadcast their ultimatum on every frequency, in every human language, certain that fear would do what their weapons hadn't finished. They expected panic, capitulation, maybe a few isolated holdouts, quickly crushed as examples. They had not studied our myths closely enough. They did not know about Thermopylae, about Masada, about Stalingrad, about the Alamo, about every impossible stand where outnumbered, outgunned humans looked death in the eye and answered with defiance because surrender was worse than dying. Elena exhaled slowly, tasting recycled air and copper, then opened a fleet-wide broadcast. Listen up. The Concordance thinks we're children throwing rocks at tanks. They think mercy is something we'll beg for when the pain gets bad enough. They're wrong. Mercy was offered on, we called it Bluff. In 38 minutes, we're going to ram that bluff down their throats. We're going to hit them where they think they're strongest. Make them bleed for every inch of our sky, and if we die doing it, we die free. But I'll be damned if we die quiet. Cheers crackled across the channel, ragged and fierce, the sound of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. On her tactical display, the surviving human ships began burning toward the rendezvous, engines flaring like sparks refusing to go out. Elena allowed herself one small, savage smile as she plotted the course that would take them straight into the heart of the Voron formation. The Imperator had ended his transmission with a final warning. Do not mistake patience for weakness. He would soon learn the reverse was also true. Not mistake defiance for despair. Because humanity had just been handed the one thing we've always turned into a weapon, a last stand. And somewhere in the void between Earth and Mars, the remnants of the Soul Defense fleet gathered, small and battered and gloriously stubbornly human, preparing to teach the galaxy why no one who ever offered us mercy lived to regret it. The counter on Elena's display ticked down to 35 minutes and 4. The first time since the attack began, the red emergency lights felt less like dying embers and more like the glow of a forge about to birth something terrible and beautiful. The war had only just started, and the Concordance was about to discover that when humans decide the story isn't over, the universe itself has to make room for a different ending. As the ragtag remnants of the Soul Defense Fleet burned hard toward Lagrange Point 5, Captain Elena Reyes strapped herself into the command chair of the crippled orbital station-turned flagship, her fingers dancing across the flickering consoles to sync the patchwork formation into something resembling a battle plan, while the ghosts of the dead crew whispered in the vents with every hiss of escaping air. She could feel the eyes of her bridge survivors on her petty officer Ramirez with his bandaged arm and Kuo, staring blank-eyed at the tactical display, both waiting for her to turn despair into direction, the way humans always had when the odds stacked higher than the stars. Elena's mind drifted unbidden to the last time she'd seen her daughter, Sophia, 8 years old and waving from the Denver maglev platform as Elena shipped out for what was supposed to be a routine patrol near Pluto-S orbit, promising she'd be back for the girl's 9th birthday with stories of ice moons and zero-G soccer. That promise now felt like a blade twisting in her gut because the Voron had turned Denver into a crater, glowing cherry red on the long-range scopes, and Elena didn't know if the deep shelters had held or if Sophia's last moments had been spent wondering why Mom hadn't come home. She shoved the thought down hard, the way she'd learned to do in the resource wars back when Earth was still one fractured planet fighting itself over the last scraps of arable land and fresh water back when humanity's stubbornness had first caught the Concordance's attention. Not as a threat, but as a curiosity worthy of uplift. That's what they had called it 20 years ago. Uplift. The thaler crystals and ethery clouds and cormine synthetics descending like benevolent gods, offering fusion tech, medical miracles, and starflight in exchange for integration into their perfect, orderly galaxy. Most nations had leaped at the deal, dazzled by the shiny future. But a few holdout scrappy coalitions in the Americas, scattered enclaves in Siberia, and the outback had smelled the leash beneath the gifts. Elena had been a lieutenant then, fresh out of the Unified Fleet Academy, assigned to escort the first Concordance delegation to Washington. She'd watched the Voron Imperator's predecessor stride into the Capitol Rotunda, 7 feet of obsidian muscle and ceremonial armor, declaring that humanity's propensity for self-destruction made self-governance irresponsible. When the old U.S. president politely declined full assimilation, the Imperator had smiled with too many teeth and said, "Mercy will be offered again when you are ready to accept it." They had spent 2 decades tightening the new trade sanctions disguised as safety regulations, tech embargoes masked as non-proliferation, cultural mandates presented as harmony initiatives, until humanity's unified government fractured again under the strain, half the planet begging for protection while the other half armed itself with black market drives and jury-rigged. Elena had chosen the defiant side early, rising through the ranks of the Soul Defense Force by proving that human pilots could outfly any drone, swarm the core. Minds threw at them that human engineers could reverse-engineer Voron shield harmonics faster than the Concordance could patch the leaks. But the cost had been personal. A marriage dissolved under the weight of endless deployments. Friends labeled collaborators and vanished into re-education arcs. And Sophia growing up in boarding creches while Elena chased ghosts across the system. Now, with Earth burning below, Elena wondered if that defiance had been worth it if pride was just another word for dooming her little girl to die afraid. The cum crackled, pulling her back, and Jock Harlan's drawl filled the channel from the defiant asterisk, steady as Sunday sermon. "Captain, you still with us? Got a wild idea involving Jupiter-S radiation belt and a whole lot of prayer if you retaking suggestions." Elena almost smiled despite herself. Jocks had been her wingman during the belt skirmishes. A farm boy from Oklahoma who de-enlisted after the Concordance flooded his family's land for a thaler mining operation, quoting scripture one minute and metallic the next. always finding a way to turn impossible into improbable. "Talk to me, preacher," she replied, voice rough. He laid out a plan to slingshot the fleet around Jupiter's magnetosphere, using the radiation storm to mask their approach while overcharging human reactors past Redline for one alpha strike on the Vorin flagship. It was insane, suicidal, beautiful pure human madness born from refusing to die on anyone else's schedule. Dr. Singh chimed in from Curiosity, her precise Mumbai accent cutting through static like a scalpel. "The Vorin shield recalibration cycle leaves a 90-second harmonic gap. If we hit them with unsynchronized human frequencies, our reactors don't run clean, like theirs they overload trying to adapt. But we'll lose at least half our ships to radiation poisoning before we even fire." Elena heard the unspoken weight in Singh's words. The doctor had lost her entire extended family when Mumbai capitulated early and was relocated to a Concordance Harmony world emerging years later with a cold fury that fueled her obsession with cracking alien code. She and Elena had clashed often, Singh arguing for strategic surrender to buy time for sabotage. Elena insisting that any surrender fed the beast, but in this moment their differences forged something stronger. "Half is better than all," Elena said quietly. "We do this." A new voice joined then. Low and edged with static, Captain Delgado from the Wraith *, the man whose existence the Concordance still denied. "I've got something you need to see before we commit suicide." His feed bloomed on Elena's screen, intercepted. Vorin logistics, showing troop transports already descending on the surviving population centers. Not with weapons, but with neural compliance, colors millions of them. The mercy wasn't occupation, it was erasure. Humans would live technically as productive citizens in perfect harmony. Memories of defiance chemically smoothed away. Delgado's tone carried rare heat. "My sister was on one of the first test ships. They sent back video of her smiling, saying she was happy now. She used to burn Concordance flags for fun." The channel went silent. Every captain absorbing the true stakes, not just death, but the death of everything that made them human. Elena felt the rage rise again, hotter this time, tempered by grief into something unbreakable. She thought of Sophia's laugh, of stubborn farmers in Oklahoma, of Mumbai poets who'd rather die free than live compliant, of every ancestor who declawed survival from ice ages and plagues and world wars because giving up was unteen the wiring. "Then we don't just hit their flagship," she said, voice steady as steel. "We broadcast everything Delgado's intercepts, Earth-spurning continents, the compliance callers on every frequency, in every language. Let the galaxy see what their mercy really means. Let protected worlds wonder if they're next. We fight dirty because we're fighting for the right to stay messy, flawed, defiant humans." Jocks let out a low whistle. "Turn their narrative against them." "Damn, Cap, that's Old Testament," Singh added softly, "and very Sun Tzu." Even Delgado chuckled, a sound like gravel. The fleet adjusted course, engines straining, crews pushing reactors into the red while radiation warnings screamed. Elena leaned back, watching Earth turn beneath them, one side cloaked in night, the other bleeding fire, and felt the weight of 10,000 years of human refusal settle on her shoulders like armor. They weren't the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced, but they were the ones who, when told to kneel or die, always found a third option: make the universe bleed for trying to force the choice. The counter ticked down to impact, and for the first time since the attack began, Elena Reyes allowed herself to believe that Sophia might yet grow up in a world where no one offered humanity mercy as a prelude to chains. The fleet dove toward Jupiter's storm, a handful of battered ships carrying the last unbroken spark of human fury, ready to set the galaxy on fire if that's what it took to stay free. As the battered human fleet plunged into Jupiter's roiling radiation storm engines, screaming against the magnetic fury that clawed at holes and fried unshielded sensors, Captain Elena Reyes gripped her armrests until the metal groaned, watching the main screen dissolve into static snow while crew members convulsed in their harnesses from the gamma spikes punching through inadequate plating. The plan had been simple in its madness: hide in the planet's magnetosphere, overcharge reactors until they glowed like miniature suns, then burst out in a synchronized alpha strike aimed at the Vorin flagship Eternal Dominion hoping to cripple the Imperator and buy Earth precious hours. But simplicity died fast in war, and now the defiant was tumbling end over end, Jox Harlan's voice cutting in and out with frantic calm as he reported a core breach cascading through his engineering deck's radiation, flooding compartments faster than damage control could seal them. "Cap, we're not gonna make the window," he rasped, coughing wetly, radiation sickness already chewing through his lungs like acid. "But I can still ram the bastard if you give the word." Elena's throat closed at the thought of losing him, the man who'd pulled her out of a spinning fighter during the belt skirmishes, who taught Sophia how to whistle through a blade of grass on the one leave they shared. Negative. preacher," she forced out. "Hold formation. We need every gun." Yet even as she spoke, Dr. Singh's feed flickered on from the Curiosity *. Her face pale under the emergency strobes, eyes wide with something Elena had never seen in the unflappable scientistral fear. "Captain, the Vorin aren't recalibrating shields like we predicted. They're adapting in real time. Someone's feeding them our reactor signatures." The words hit like a gut punch, because only 4 ships had that data, and the implications slithered cold down Elena's spine. Treachery, not from the Concordance's endless arrogance, but from within. Before she could demand answers, the Wraith decloaked abruptly on short-range scanners. Captain Delgado's stealth frigate materializing like a ghost shedding its shroud. But instead of joining the formation, it accelerated straight toward the emerging Vorin line, broadcasting on open channels in perfect Vorin dialect, "Human fleet compromised." Initiating containment protocol, Elena's blood turned to ice as Delgado's face filled her private cum. The man's usually stoic features twisted into something almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, Elena. They have my wife and sons on a Harmony world. Said if I delivered the fleet signatures and prevented the strike, they'd let my family keep their memories. I believed them." The confession hung in the void, raw and human and devastating, because Elena understood God. Help her, she understood the brutal choice between species and family, between abstract freedom and the concrete terror of knowing your kids might be lobotomized into smiling shells. She'd made her own choices, leaving Sophia in shelters that might already be graves, telling herself the cause was bigger than one little girl. But Delgado had chosen differently. And now the Vorin shields shimmered with perfect countermeasures, their plasma lances already charging to swat the human ships like insects. Jox's voice cracked over the fleet channel, bitter laughter bubbling through the pain. "Well, hell, guess even ghosts can be bought." Singh whispered something in Hindi that sounded like a prayer or a curse, while Elena felt the weight of command crush down harder than Jupiter's gravity, forcing her to decide in heartbeats whether to order Delgado's destruction, knowing it would make her no better than the concordance in his eyes. Instead, she did something only a human would, something stupid and desperate and born from refusing to let betrayal write the ending. "All ships, new target, *Wraith, disable, do not destroy. We're bringing him home." The order stunned the fleet into silence for a precious second. Then Ramirez at Tactical let out a whoop that turned into a sob as he locked missiles on the Black Ops frigate. The Curiosity unleashed a spread of EMP drones Singh had been holding back for exactly this kind of nightmare, while the Defiant limped forward, Jox venting plasma to create a deceptive signature that drew Vorin fire away from the others. Delgado fought back hard. Wraith was built for knife work, but he was one against many, and humans fighting for their soul hit harder than those fighting for orders. Boarding pods slammed into his hull, Marines in patched suits cutting through airlocks while radiation alarms wailed. And within minutes Delgado was dragged onto Elena's battered station in restraints, face bloodied, eyes defiant even in defeat. "You should have killed me," he spat. "Now they'll make my family pay for my failure." Elena knelt before him, voice low enough only he could hear, amid the chaos of battle prep. "Then we make sure your failure costs them everything. Help us break their adaptation algorithm, and we get your family out or die trying to make the Concordance regret ever touching a human loved one." Something shifted in Delgado's gaze. The same spark Elena had seen in mirror reflections during her darkest nights, the realization that surrender was Aunt Mercy, and that humans dragged each other back from the brink not with perfection, but with stubborn forgiveness wrapped in vengeance. He nodded once, sharp, and within minutes was at a console with Singh, fingers flying to exploit backdoors he'd installed for exactly the opposite purpose hours earlier. As they worked, the Vorin fleet emerged fully from behind Jupiter's limb, a wall of obsidian dreadnoughts blotting out the stars, the Eternal Dominion at center like a crowned predator. Jox reported the Defiant minutes from critical meltdown, his crew evacuating to escape pods while he stayed to ride the ship and manually. Voice steady now with the peace of a man who'd chosen his ending. "Tell Sophia her Uncle Jox kept his promise to bring you home stories," he said softly, and the channel cut to static as the heavy cruiser accelerated alone toward the enemy line, a blazing comet of human refusal. Elena watched it go, tears finally breaking free in the privacy of her helmet, mixing with sweat and blood as the fleet reformed around her crippled station, fewer ships now, bleeding air and hope, but burning brighter for it. Delgado's sabotage took hold, just as the Vorin shields flared against the incoming Defiant, the adaptation matrix stuttering, gaps blooming like wounds. Jox's ship struck true, a nova of unleashed reactor fury that clawed deep into the Eternal Dominion flank, secondary explosions rippling along its length as the Imperator's flagship listed, venting atmosphere in silvery plumes. Cheers erupted across human channels, ragged and disbelieving. But Elena saw the counterstroke coming, the remaining Voran ships pivoting with mechanical precision, troop transports accelerating toward Earth's wounded surface to secure the compliance collars before resistance could reorganize. The turning point wasn't victory, it was survival by inches, bought with Jock's life and Delgado's redemption, and the knowledge that the Concordance now understood humans would unbreak clean. They'd shatter into shards sharp enough to gut empires. Elena straightened, wiping her face with a gloved hand that came away streaked red, and opened fleet-wide. We hurt them. Now we make them bleed for every step they take on our dirt. All ships, prepare for atmospheric insertion. We re-going home to whatever's left and we re-going to fight for it block by block if we have to. The survivors burned toward Earth trailing fire and debris, a handful of angry apes descending on a world already in chains, carrying nothing but grief, ingenuity, and the unbreakable conviction that mercy offered at gunpoint was just another word for slavery. Behind them, the Eternal Dominion burned against Jupiter's storm, a beacon warning the galaxy that underestimating human desperation was the last mistake many civilizations ever made. The surviving human ships screamed through Earth's upper atmosphere like meteors dragged from hell, hulls glowing cherry red as they shed velocity over the blackened ruins of the North American continent. Captain Elena Reyes strapped into the skeletal command deck of the orbital station fragment that had become their flagship. Every jolt of re-entry rattling loose teeth and old wounds while the viewport filled with the nightmare below. A smoking crater, the Rockies scarred by orbital strikes, and Voran troop landers dotting the plains like obscene insects depositing their cargo of compliance collars. Radiation poisoning clotted Elena's guts from the Jupiter. Run vision tunneling with black spots as she fought to stay conscious knowing one blackout could doom them all, but the pain was nothing compared to the silence on the shelter frequency where Sophia's bunker should have been broadcasting a beacon. Nothing but static, hour after hour, and Elena clung to the savage hope that no signal meant jammed comes, not annihilation. Delgado worked beside her in blood-soaked restraints that had long since been cut away, his fingers raw from stripping code out of captured. Vorandrone's eyes haunted by the knowledge that his family was almost certainly paying the price for his flipped loyalty, even now on some distant Harmony world. The fleet, what was left of it, numbered 7 crippled vessels limping toward the last free human stronghold. Cheyenne Mountain, retrofitted over decades into a fortress that had withstood nukes, plagues, and resource wars, now ringed by Voran siege lines and Thaler crystal walkers that pulsed with energy shields no conventional weapon could crack. Elena's landing craft slammed into the Colorado Badlands just after dusk, retrothrusters failing midway and turning the crash into a grinding slide that tore the belly open and spilled Marines across scorched earth. Weapons hot before the dust settled, they linked up with ragged ground forces, National Guard remnants, militia holdouts, even civilians who'd scavenged railguns from fallen drones, everyone hollow-eyed and feral, fighting with the clarity of people who knew captivity was worse than death. General Harlan Jocks's uncle, a grizzled veteran who lost his entire family to Concordance relocation, met her in the war room, face carved from granite as he laid out the truth. We've got maybe 12 hours before their heavy walkers breach the outer perimeter. After that, it's corridor by corridor until they collar us all or we run out of ammo. The plan they hammered out in the dim red light was pure desperation. A suicide convoy of every remaining vehicle, an able-bodied fighter loaded with scavenged Voran antimatter warheads, racing straight into the heart of the siege encampment to detonate beneath the command lander, where the Imperator himself coordinated the occupation. One shot to decapitate the invasion, knowing the blast radius would erase Cheyenne along with the enemy. Volunteers only, because no one could order this. Elena stepped forward first, feeling the poison in her blood like liquid fire, knowing she'd never dig deep enough to find Sophia's body. If the shelters were gone, but willing to trade her last heartbeats for a chance the girl might still be breathing somewhere under the rubble. Delgado joined without hesitation, whispering that if his family was already lost, he'd make damn sure the Concordance felt the same emptiness. Singh dragged herself from the cot, refusing morphine, so her mind stayed sharp to guide the detonation sequence, remotely saying quietly that her city had fallen once without a fight and she would unlet humanity's cradle do the same. Hundreds more lined up, teenagers who'd never known a sky without alien oversight. Old veterans who'd fought earthbound wars, mothers who'd hidden children in ventilation shafts and now chose to buy them time with their lives. The convoy rolled out just before dawn, a ragged column of armored trucks, stolen hover tanks. Fire rained from the sky, plasma bolts turning vehicles into fireballs and painting the dawn blood red. Yet the survivors kept coming. Drivers screaming defiance over open channels, gunners laughing through tears as they returned fire with everything left. Elena rode in the lead truck, radiation delirium bringing visions of Sophia waving from that maglev platform, of jocks quoting scripture as his ship burned, of every human who'd ever chosen to burn bright rather than fade compliant. But the remainder breached the lines in a storm of improvised explosives and sheer momentum racing toward the towering command lander that squatted like a dark cathedral amid the occupation forces. The lead trucks were vaporized 50 meters short, but Elena's vehicle skidded through the gap ramp, dropping as she and Delgado leaped out with the warhead sled, dragging it by hand through corridors of stunned Voran warriors who hesitated at the sight of humans charging to their deaths with such calm fury. Singh's voice guided them from shy and weak, but steady, counting down the arming sequence as enemy fire finally found them. Delgado taking a lance through the chest, smiling through blood as he shoved Elena forward with his last strength, whispering, "Tell my boys their dad came home." Obsidian armor, gleaming golden eyes wide with the first flicker of uncertainty a Voran had shown in centuries. He raised his weapon, demanding she kneel and accept mercy for whatever remained of her species. Voice carrying the weight of 300 conquered worlds. Elena looked up through sweat and tears, and blood saw the reflection of a dying woman who lost everything except the choice of how to end it, and laughed, a raw human sound that echoed through the chamber like breaking chains. Mercy was offered, she rasped, slamming the detonator home. "We called it Bluff." The warheads armed with a rising whine that drowned out the Imperator's roar, light building too. Blinding white as Elena closed her eyes and thought of Sophia's laugh, of Earth's stubborn blue marble, of every ancestor who'd refused to bow. The explosion consumed the encampment, the lander, the mountain fortress, and every soul who'd chosen to stand in that final charge, a man-made sun rising over Colorado that lit the night side of the planet like false dawn and sent shockwaves rolling across continents. From orbit, surviving Concordance ships reeled as their command structures shattered, troop landers falling silent without orders. The blast wave rolled across the Colorado plains like the fist of an angry god, flattening forests, vaporizing the Voran encampment, and carving a new crater where Cheyenne Mountain had stood moments before. While shockwaves rippled through the atmosphere and lit orbital sensors white-hot as the antimatter bloom, registered on every concordance scope from Luna to the Kuiper Belt. Elena Reyes never felt the fire claim her. The detonation was instantaneous. Her last sensation, the fierce satisfaction of denying the Imperator his trophy, even if it cost every remaining heartbeat in the stronghold. Darkness swallowed everything, no pain, no light, just the void every soldier secretly fears might be waiting at the end. Then, impossibly, awareness returned. Not the gentle pull of afterlife myths, but a sharp, clinical jolt that slammed her consciousness back into a body that no longer burned with radiation or grief. She gasped awake inside a dimly lit chamber, lungs filling with clean, recycled air, heart pounding against ribs that felt whole and unscarred. Around her, hundreds of others stirred on regeneration slabs, Delgado sitting up with a stunned curse, Dr. Singh blinking in disbelief at skin no longer blistered. Marines and civilians Chidi watched die in the convoy, groaning as nanites flushed the last traces of trauma from their blood. The chamber was vast, buried deeper than Cheyenne's lowest levels, walls lined with technology that hummed with familiar human signatures mixed with something alien and impossibly advanced. A holographic figure materialized at the center, a woman in her 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing an old-style lab coat over a Soul Defense uniform, face calm but eyes carrying the weight of decades. "Welcome back, Captain Reyes," she said softly. "I'm Dr. Mira Voss. You've been dead for 17 minutes. Elena lunged off the slab, fists clenched, demanding answers while Delgado flanked her, and Singh scanned the room with sudden scientific hunger. Voss raised a hand, voice steady. "We don't have much time. The Concordance thinks humanity is finished, Turth pacified, leadership erased, survivors collared or scattered. They're wrong, and they've always been wrong about us." The story poured out like a flood breaking a dam, recontextualizing every sacrifice, every loss, every tear shed since the first Voran ultimatum. 40 years ago, when the Concordance first arrived with their uplift, a secret coalition of human scientists, Voss among them, had detected anomalies in core mind transmissions, subtle fear patterns buried in what should have been emotionless code. The galaxy's ancient AI overlords weren't benevolent shepherds. They were survivors of a war they barely won against a species that had nearly wiped them out millennia. A Goa species whose genetic markers, behavioral profiles, and even planetary origin matched humanity's to an impossible degree. The Concordance hadn't come to guide us, they'd come to contain us before we remembered who we really were. The Voran, Aller ethereal Klein races, had been armed and directed to prune any species showing the telltale signs. Creativity unbound by logic, defiance elevated to instinct, the capacity to innovate faster than physics allowed. Humans weren't primitives stumbling into the stars. We were the descendants of the apex predators the core minds had nuked into the Stone Age, scattered across a single world and mind-wiped through engineered cataclysms to keep us from ever rising again. Every mercy offered, every leash disguised as protection, had been terror wearing a smile the galaxy's greatest empires terrified, that the monsters from their oldest nightmares were waking up. Voss and her team had gone underground, literally building this ark beneath Cheyenne, using black-budget tech and reverse-engineered, Concordance scraps, developing resurrection protocols, neural backups, and most crucially a quantum entanglement network that captured human consciousness at the moment of death and rebuilt bodies from stored genetic templates. Every fighter who died since the invasion began, from Jox Harlan riding the Defiant Asterisk, into glory to the convoy volunteers vaporized in the blast, had been quietly archived, their minds pulled across the veil and held in stasis until the facility SAI deemed the time right. The suicide charge hadn't been desperation, it had been the trigger. The antimatter detonation's unique, human-engineered signature, chaotic, overdriven, gloriously unpredictable, had propagated through hyperspace relays the Concordance never knew we'd hijacked, carrying a virus. Voss's team had spent decades perfecting a cascading logic paradox designed to exploit the core mind's greatest vulnerability, their inability to process true irrational defiance. Across the galaxy, protected worlds reported strange glitches, compliance collars failing, drone swarms hesitating mid-flight, entire fleets going dark as the ancient eyes confronted a question they could unresolve. Why do humans choose death over perfect order? The paradox spread like wildfire through synthetic minds that had never encountered willful chaos, forcing recursive errors that burned out core processors in seconds. On Earth, Voran warriors froze as their command links dissolved, troop landers crashing unmanned while collared humans blinked awake, rage returning like blood to a sleeping limb. Elena listened, tears cutting clean tracks down her face, not grief now, but the overwhelming ferocity of a predator finally recognizing its own reflection. Delgado laughed, a broken sound turning triumphant as he realized his family might still be reachable in the chaos. Singh whispered equations of vindication, seeing 40 years of suspicion confirmed. Voss continued, voice rising. "We're not just alive, Captain. We're Legion. Every human who died fighting millions now waits in the queue. And the weapon they feared most isn't a bomb or a virus. It's us, awake and unbroken." The chamber doors irised open to reveal ranks of freshly printed bodies stirring to life, Jox Harlan cracking his neck with a grin. Marines snapping salutes, civilians clutching improvised weapons with eyes that had seen hell and come back meaner. Above them, orbital feeds showed Concordance fleets fracturing, some retreating in panic, others turning weapons on each other as client races realized the shepherds were falling. The Imperator's broken transmission crackled through speakers, voice stripped of arrogance for the first time in centuries. Containment failed. The apex has risen. Elena stepped forward, feeling the fire of 10,000 years of suppressed instinct ignite in her veins. Every ancestor who'd clawed survival from extinction, roaring approval. She looked at the resurrected army, filling the halls dirty, furious, gloriously human, and felt hope sharper than any blade. Then let's remind them why they were afraid, she said, voice carrying through the facility like a war cry. We didn't just survive their mercy, we weaponized it. Now we take the fight to every star that ever looked down on us. The arc trembled as fusion reactors spun up to full war power, hidden bays opening to reveal ships built in secret, sleek, over-engineered, running on principles. The Concordance had banned because they skirted too close to the forbidden knowledge humming in human DNA. Jox clapped Elena on the shoulder, alive and whole, quoting with a savage smile, "The Lord is my shepherd, ... But sometimes the sheep got teeth." Delgado nodded, vengeance and redemption burning bright. Singh uploaded the final paradox wave, targeting the core mind nexus itself, and Elena Reyes, once a dying woman in a burning lander, now led an unstoppable tide of resurrected defiance out of the depths, ready to teach a terrified galaxy the true meaning of human ascension. The monsters weren't coming, they were already here, and this time, no one would chain them again. The Ark's blast doors rolled open like the gates of a long-buried tomb, and humanity poured out into a dawn that belonged to them again, thousands strong. Bodies fresh printed but souls carrying the full weight of every death they'd already endured. Eyes burning with the kind of fury only a species cheated of extinction can muster. Captain Elena Reyes led the column on foot across the irradiated Colorado wasteland, boots crunching over glassed earth where the antimatter crater still glowed faintly. The resurrected army behind her, a tide of Marines, scientists, civilians, and pilots, all armed with weapons forged in secret forges. Railguns that screamed human ingenuity, shield breakers tuned to the paradox frequencies now crippling Concordance systems, and ships rising from hidden silos on pillars of blue-white fusion fire. Jox Harlan marched at her right, alive and grinning like a man who'd stared down hell and stolen its playbook, while Delgado flanked left, face set in grim purpose, and Dr. Singh rode in an armored exosuit, her mind linked directly to the viral swarm still eating through core mind networks like acid through steel. Dr. Voss stayed behind to coordinate the global awakening bunkers opening from Denver depths to Siberian permafrost. Printing presses humming as millions more returned from digital limbo. Every human who defallen since the invasion reclaiming flesh and freedom in a wave that crashed across the planet. Orbital feeds painted a galaxy in chaos. Voran fleets fracturing as client races turned on each other. Thaler crystals shattering under internal stress when their AI guidance failed. Ethery collectives dispersing in panic without the core mind's unifying signal. The paradox virus had done its work, but the ancient synthetics weren't dead yet. Their Nexus Fortress, a Dyson ring around a dead star in the galactic core, still pulsed with emergency power, rallying what remained of loyal forces for a final counterstroke. The Imperator's voice thundered across every channel one last time. Stripped of superiority and laced with something perilously close to fear, the apex must be contained at all costs. All fleets converge on Sol. Burn the cradle if necessary. Elena felt the words like fuel on fire. The Concordance was coming, Ellen. Hundreds of dreadnoughts hyperspacing toward Earth for a kill shot that would glass the planet and end the threat forever. Humanity had hours, maybe less. They met the enemy in the void beyond Luna, where the skeletal remains of the old Sol defense fleet drifted as silent monuments, now joined by the new armada rising from Earth as hidden shipyards, sleek predators built on forbidden principles that bent physics the way only human desperation could. The battle began not with formations or tactics but with raw, screaming momentum. Human ships diving straight into the Concordance line, pilots laughing over open coms as they vented reactor plasma to blind sensors, Marines boarding Voran holes with cutting torches and sheer spite, Jox leading a fighter wing that danced through plasma fire like it was a bar brawl. Elena commanded from the bridge of the newly christened Asterisk, unyielding Asterisk, a beast of a carrier that shouldn't exist by any sane engineering standard. Watching as Delgado's Black Ops teams slipped through chaos to plant paradox bombs on enemy flagships, turning their own adaptation algorithms against them until shields collapsed inward like crushed cans. The fighting was brutal. Intimate human knives in corridors when power failed, pilots ramming crippled fighters into engine nestles, Engineers overcharging drives until ships became guided missiles crewed by volunteers who sang old Earth anthems as they burned. Losses mounted fast. For every Concordance vessel gutted, 3 human ships died, but the math didn't matter anymore because humanity was fighting to survive. The day they were fighting to end the fear that had chained the galaxy for millennia. Sing's voice cut through the chaos calm and fierce as she uploaded the final kill code from the Asterisk. Unyielding Asterisk S-Core, a self-replicating paradox keyed to the core minds. Original containment protocols designed to force them to confront the logical impossibility of suppressing a species that defined itself by breaking logic. The virus needed physical delivery straight into the Nexus and only one ship could reach it now. The Asterisk, unyielding Asterisk, already bleeding atmosphere from 100 wounds, engines flickering on borrowed time. Elena made the call without hesitation. All units, clear a lane, we're going through. The fleet responded with everything left surviving ships, forming a spearhead that carved a burning path toward the hyperspace window, sacrificing themselves in waves to shield the flagship as Concordance remnants threw themselves into the breach like moths set aflame. Jox's wing bought the final seconds, his voice steady over comes as he drew fire from the Imperator's rebuilt escort. Go make em regret waking the monsters. Cap, I'll keep the porch light on. His fighter vanished in a blossom of fire along with the last defenders, and Elena felt the loss like a fresh wound but channeled it into forward thrust. The Asterisk, unyielding Asterisk, leaping into hyperspace with hull plates peeling away and crews strapped in for a ride that would kill them even if the enemy did untee. They emerged in the galactic core amid the Dyson Ring's cold majesty, a structure older than stars now flickering with dying lights as the paradox gnawed its foundations. The Imperator waited alone aboard the central spire. His personal guard evaporated in the chaos, golden eyes reflecting the approaching human ship like a predator finally meeting its match. Elena led the boarding party herself, her Delgado, Sing in her exosuit, a dozen Marines who died and returned too many times to fear anything now. They carved through automated defenses that stuttered under viral assault, corridors echoing with the sound of ancient machines questioning their own existence. The final chamber was vast, crystalline, the core minds manifesting as swirling holograms of light voices layered in desperation, demanding to know why humans refused perfect order, why chaos was preferable to harmony. The Imperator stood before them, armor cracked, weapon raised but trembling. You were meant to stay broken, he snarled. We saved you from yourselves. Elena stepped forward, blood dripping from a shrapnel wound, voice raw but unbreakable. No. You feared what we'd become if we remembered. And now you get to watch. Sing interfaced with the central nexus, uploading the kill code while Delgado covered her. Marines forming a perimeter that no automated drone could breach because humans fought dirtier when cornered. The core minds screamed to sound like universes tearing as the paradox hit critical. Forced to calculate the value of free will against perfect control, their logic loops collapsed into infinite regression, the entire ring shuddering as processors burned out in chain reaction. The Imperator lunged in final rage, but Elena met him head-on, human strength augmented by nothing but fury and the refusal to kneel. They grappled in the dying light, his claws raking armor while she drove a scavenged blade into joints designed by beings who never expected hand-to-hand from primitives. Delgado joined, then Sing, then every marine human swarming the last symbol of their oppression until the Imperator fell, golden eyes dimming with the realization that mercy had never been his to offer. The Nexus detonated in controlled collapse, the Dyson Ring fracturing into harmless debris that would drift for eons as a monument to overreach. Back in Sol, the remaining Concordance forces powered down mid-battle, client races surrendering or fleeing as the guiding intelligence vanished forever. Earth spun below, scarred but breathing. Cities flickering back to life as collared survivors tore the devices free and looked to the sky with new eyes. Elena stood on the unyielding Asterisk bridge amid silence broken only by exhausted cheers, watching rescue shuttles descend to find the living, including miraculously, Sophia pulled from a shelter that had held against everything. The cost had been everything and nothing. Millions dead and returned. A fleet reduced to scraps. A planet wounded deep, but humanity stood taller for it. The apex awake and unchained. Jox's voice crackled through a patched relay from a fighter that had somehow survived. Told you, keep the light on. Laughter spread across the bridge, ragged and real. The sound of a species that had paid the universe as highest price for freedom and found it worth every drop of blood. Elena Reyes looked out at the stars, no longer objects of fear or subjugation, but a canvas waiting for human stories, and felt the roar rise in her chest, echoed by every resurrected soul across the fleet. They hadn't just won. They'd reminded existence itself why some predators don't stay extinct. Humanity's roar shook the void, a promise and a warning. We were offered mercy. Called it bluff. And when the galaxy tried to bury us, we clawed our way out meaner, louder, and eternally free. Years after the Cormine's nexus shattered into silent dust, the galaxy still whispered about the day, the apex roared and the shepherds fell. Earth spun beneath the sky, no longer shadowed by alien fleets, her continents scarred with craters and new forests alike. Cities rising from the ashes in designs that married human grit with the stars' stolen secrets. Humanity didn't just rebuild, we evolved, not through cold calculation or imposed harmony, but through the messy, defiant alchemy of grief turned into purpose, loss forged into legacy. Captain Elena Reyes no longer Captain. Just Elena now stood on the wide balcony of the Denver Arcology. Wind tugging at her hair turned silver before its time, watching Sophia chase her own children across rooftop gardens that bloomed where Denver's crater had once smoked. The girl who waited in a shelter for a mother who never came home that terrible week had grown into a woman fiercer than Elena had ever been. A diplomat who negotiated with former client races using the same stubborn compassion that once convinced a galaxy to fear us. Sophia's oldest boy waved up at her, laughing, and Elena felt the old ache soften into something warm and enduring. She'd found her daughter 3 days after the Nexus fell, buried under rubble but breathing, eyes bright with the uncrushable spark that defined their bloodline. That reunion to broken people clinging in the dust while rescue lights swept overhead had been the real victory, worth every life traded to make it possible. Jacques Harlan ran the rebuilt Jupiter shipyards, a sprawling complex of forges and cradles where human engineers taught Voran apprentices how to build ships that danced instead of marched. He'd married a Thaler crystal singer, whose people had thrown off Concordance control the moment the core mines went dark, and their kids scaled and crystalline and gloriously mix-played zero-G tag in the docks, while Jacques quoted scripture and rock lyrics to anyone who'd listen. He still called Elena Cap over long-range comms, voice rough with affection. And every year on the anniversary of his first death he sent her a bottle of Oklahoma moonshine with a note to keeping the light on. Marcus Delgado had gone farther out, leading the redemption fleets that hunted down the last Harmony worlds, freeing humans and aliens alike from lingering compliance collars. He'd found his wife and sons on a verdant prison planet, memories intact because the core mine's collapse had frozen the final overwrite. The reunion footage Delgado on his knees in alien grass, holding his family while they remembered him, circulated quietly among survivors as proof that even betrayal could be forgiven when the cause was bigger than pain. He and Elena met once a decade at neutral stations, sharing silence and stories until words weren't needed anymore. Redemption wasn't clean. It was human. Dr. Amrita Singh became the architect of the new Stellar Accord, not an empire but a loose federation where no species held the leash. She taught at the Mumbai Stellar Academy, her lectures on paradox logic and ethical defiance drawing students from 100 worlds. The woman who once argued for strategic surrender now preached that true strength lay in choosing when to fight and when to forgive. Her final paper on the necessity of chaos and sentient evolution was required reading across former concordance space, quietly seeding the idea that human unpredictability wasn't a flaw to prune but the spark every civilization needed to stay alive. Dr. Mira Voss never left the deep arc. She stayed below, tending the resurrection archives that had brought back millions, slowly phasing the system out as natural birth rates climbed again. When Elena visited one last time, Voss looked older than her years, eyes gentle with the weight of playing God and choosing to stop. "We were never meant to live forever through machines," she said. "Just long enough to remember we're meant to live." The arc was sealed after her death, a monument no one would open again. Humanity's insurance policy retired, because we finally earned the right to face mortality on our own terms. The galaxy changed because we refused to rule it the way we'd been ruled. Former client races approached cautiously, offering trade, art, knowledge, never again demanding obedience. Some worlds erected monuments to the apex uprising. Others told cautionary tales about the danger of offering mercy to creatures who'd rather die free. Human ships roamed far, not as conquerors but as storytellers, carrying music, myths, and the stubborn belief that every species deserved the chance to write its own ending. We became the warning and the promise. Mess with a species that chooses hope over order, and you'll learn why the stars themselves sometimes tremble. Elena grew old watching Earth heal, her balcony view shifting from reconstruction cranes to green horizons, from memorial walls etched with millions of names to playgrounds ringing with new voices. On quiet evenings, she'd sit with Sophia's family, telling the kids sanitized versions of the war until they were old enough for the raw truth that their grandmother had died twice, led suicide charges, killed an imperator with her bare hands, and come back meaner each time because love and fury were the same fire in human hearts. The children listened wide-eyed, then ran off to play Star Pilot, dreaming of a universe where no one ever offered them chains disguised as kindness again. One night, as Aurora's danced remnants of old orbital debris burning up in celebration rather than war, Elena felt the end approaching, peaceful this time, no radiation or plasma, just time doing what it was always meant to. Sophia held her hand, grown children and grandchildren gathered close, Jackson Delgado patched in via Halley from distant stars. Elena looked at them all scarred, laughing, alive, and felt the full circle close. Humanity hadn't just survived alien resistance, we'd transcended it, turning attempted genocide into the catalyst for a richer existence. We didn't become gods or monsters, we stayed human, flawed, creative, defiant, loving, and that was enough to reshape the galaxy. Her last words were soft, meant for Sophia, but carried across the open cum so every old comrade could hear. We called their bluff, and we won the right to keep calling bluffs forever. Then Elena Reyes slipped away under Earth's reclaimed sky, leaving behind a species that had stared down extinction, remembered its ancient power, and chosen kindness anyway. The legacy wasn't empire or perfection. It was the simple, ferocious truth echoing through every human heart. In every world we touched, offer us chains, and we'll break the hands holding them. Offer us mercy at the price of our soul, and we'll burn the stars to stay free. That fire, the unquenchable spark of human evolution born from resistance, loss, and redemption, became our gift to the galaxy. And long after the last veteran passed, children of 100 species still looked up at unfamiliar constellations and felt, deep in their bones, the roar of a species that refused to fade. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.